Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining, and thank you for your patience. Just wanted to let a couple more people come in before we started the presentation. Today we have Monica Moore with the Mary Eaton Center for Alzheimer's Research and Care at UCLA, and she's going to be talking about clinical trials and things like that are happening at UCLA. If you have any questions, feel free to put them either in the chat feature or in the Q&A feature, and we will answer them as the presentation moves along. And then if you have any questions at the end, feel free to ask questions at the end as well. And I will let Monica take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Daphne. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thanks for spending your time with us this afternoon. So as Daphne said, my name is Monica Moore. I work at the Mary S. Eaton Center for Alzheimer's Research and Care at UCLA. It is a mouthful. Essentially what we are is we're the, Yes, okay. We are the Alzheimer's Research Center, and so we have clinical trials, we have clinical care. So if people need to come and get a proper diagnosis or a proper evaluation, that is something that we have neurologists who can help with. We also have a large research area of our organization. As I always say, those are the super smart people in their labs trying to figure out Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementias. And then we have caregiver support because we realize that this is a difficult journey that people are on. And so we want to be able to be there to for support of people while they're on this journey. So I am the co-director of education and training activities for the Eaton Center. I've been there for 10 years now, super excited about that. And I've occupied this space of Alzheimer's disease research and caregiver support for over 20 years. It's always been my area of focus because my grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, as is often the case in lots of these organizations. And we come to our jobs with personal experience and a real desire to try to make a difference. So I'm grateful to be able to be partnering with Lisa's Care Connection and the Jocelyn Center in Burbank today for this talk. So at the beginning, I just always like to do what I call like a level setting, making sure that people are understanding some of these concepts that the rest of the presentation will build upon. And so this first one, again, just sort of talking about what is dementia. So dementia itself is a word that describes a group of symptoms. Dementia itself is not a diagnosis. It is where there is a combination between a cognitive decline that someone is experiencing along with functional impairment. So cognitive decline, problems with the way a person is thinking, their language, memory, judgment, or reasoning, and new problems. So not a problem that they've always had. Like, I'm not good with numbers. I will be the first to admit. You can tell me, ask me, how much did you pay for your car? And I'm going to say, I don't know. It's not that I don't know. I just don't remember numbers. I never have. So we all have sort of our own personal baseline of the way our brain works. Some people may be great with names or directions. Some people may get lost in their own neighborhood, but naturally. So the decline itself is or dementia itself is when a decline comes in an area, and now it is starting to impact your functional impairment. So it's impacting your ability to take medication, your ability to drive, to pay bills. But it's important to know this is not a normal part of aging. So, we all will experience some memory loss as we age. Our brains do slow down, but actual dementia itself is not a normal part of aging. So what causes dementia? Here's the umbrella term, the umbrella that shows all the different types, or not all, but some of the different types of dementias that do fall underneath this umbrella. So Alzheimer's disease is going to be your most common form, frontal temporal, dementia with Lewy body, Parkinson's disease, vascular dementia, traumatic brain injury. So again, dementia is the umbrella. And all of these are different types of dementia. I sometimes will use the word dementia as an example. Say if you have pain, if you're going to the doctor because your wrist hurts, your symptom is pain. And the goal of going to the doctors is to find out what is causing the pain. right? So if you are having symptoms of dementia, problems with thinking and reasoning, what you are going to go to the doctor to find out what is causing those. So someone shouldn't just say, "Oh, you have dementia." You're like, "Well, I knew that. I knew I wasn't thinking right. I knew I was having these problems. So how can we find the real cause of what is there an underlying disease, the pathology that is occurring that is causing this dementia?" So hopefully that makes sense. So we see now a lot when we're looking at research and when we're looking at where we have come from in the world of understanding Alzheimer's disease. We look at it, it was initially discovered in 1908. So now here we're at 2025. So, many years, but not that much really happened for lots of those years in terms of better diagnosis, better treatment. So like I mentioned earlier, my grandmother had Alzheimer's and she was diagnosed in the early 1990s. And at that point, she was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease, hardening of the arteries, senility, right? These terms that we used to use. But now, if she was to be diagnosed, and I am not a doctor, so I always want to make that very clear. But I would say she'd probably be diagnosed with a mixed dementia of Alzheimer's disease and vascular. She had a very significant stroke, which impacted her cognition. So now, though, because of research and because of different trials and studies, doctors are able to diagnose with a much greater level of confidence. They're able to diagnose much earlier. And now they're able to identify what we call biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease. So these are the amyloid plaques or the neurofibrillary tangles or the tau that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. But now we know how to identify those. We now know really what does this mean. So this could be tested through a cerebral spinal fluid or lumbar puncture. An MRI can measure the volume of the brain, and then PET imaging can then show the activity of the brain, what is happening to see really what's going on inside the brain. So we see how research has really made a big difference and has come a long way in the world of Alzheimer's disease diagnosis and ultimately treatment, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So while we say, well, there's still no cure and we still don't know what causes this disease, we say, correct, but we really have made great strides in the world of Alzheimer's disease research. So one of the things that we really are focusing a lot on and for clinical trials and research studies is this great world of diversity. We are all different, right? You're different than me, different than the person sitting next to you, just because we are, right? The way that, our genetics are different. So most of the research that has been done for Alzheimer's disease and pretty much across the board for most illnesses has been really based upon knowledge from white males. So women and minorities are vastly underrepresented in this world. And so we see the disparities with that, especially considering 2/3 of the women with 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's disease are women. So if most of the treatments have been tested on men, just as simply right there, those numbers don't add up, right? So it's this world of needing the involvement, needing the people to say yes to clinical trials and to research, which I, commend all of you for being here just to learn more. We also look at, especially here in the greater LA area, we are such a multicultural, diverse community. And so we see how it's even more important for different ethnicities to be properly represented in clinical trials. African Americans are only 2.4% of clinical trials participants. Yet African Americans have a greater risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Hispanics, again, 2% of all clinical trial participants, and also have a greater risk of developing this disease. So knowing that it's important because of differences in gender, race, and ethnicity, is making sure that people are properly represented. I used to work with this one doctor years ago, and he was of Korean descent, and he would talk a lot about trials and participation. He was very passionate about it, and he'd always use the example. And I don't know the exact name of the medication, but there is one of like the hair loss medications that when FDA approved, but as they were prescribing it, they realized that men of Asian descent would develop a rash after like taking the medication. This was never noticed during the clinical trials for that medication because there were no Asians in the clinical trial. But realizing how this medication shouldn't be prescribed to this population because of this rash. So seeing how something made it all the way through and became FDA approved prescription medication that really actually had a pretty significant side effect for a percentage of the population. So realizing the importance of participation. So, I'm going to start really diving into this world of clinical trials and clinical studies, and why. Like, why should we participate in these? And I know since you're not here, and I'm just sort of talking to myself, I'm here on screen. But if there are people online, or if anyone actually at the Joslin Center, if you want to, someone toss it in the chat or something. If there is anyone here who has ever participated in a clinical trial or a research study before. Put that in the chat if you have or have not. All right. So most of us, for the most part, probably haven't, right? I've been a part of a study for, it's called the Wisdom Study regarding breast cancer, just studying about women across the board for a number of years. My daughter, when she was little, participated in a study about like adolescent brains, just trying to figure out like how do they grow, what makes people different, and all of these are very important. It's not always taking a drug, right? So by participating in a clinical trial or a study, you can learn more about your disease or your condition, and actually feel like you're playing an active part in your healthcare. So much of our healthcare really is passive, right? We go to the doctor tells us what to do, we hopefully do it. But this way, you're actually being able to help create the next world of directives that doctors are going to share with other people. And actually, it's a very significant role that you can take. Also help researchers find new ways to prevent or to treat diseases. This is really one of the big goals, right? We want to live healthier longer. Some people may want to live forever, but we're not quite there yet. But realizing that we want to live as healthy as we can for as long as possible. So then having an active part in a clinical trial and in participation really can make a big difference in this area of helping future generations. And so while you may not be a doctor, this is allowing a doctor to really learn from you. So when it comes to research studies, the National Institute on Aging, at least ones that are older adult focused, has great information on just learning more. So the information is here on the page going to the NIA. NIA is the National Institute on Aging. NIH is the National Institute on Health, just for your acronym knowledge. So talking about trials and research studies. So what are they? What types exist? So many, many different types exist, and I'll talk about them throughout this presentation. But there's two main kinds. There's clinical trials, which would be more of what we call an interventional study. So this would be somebody who they're testing a new medication, they're trying a new assistive device. They are trying to learn information based upon information we already have. So is it now, we know it's important to keep blood pressure low. So how are we going to, if we split all of us up into two different groups And we have group A exercise, and we have group B binge watch a movie marathon. And we see if it helps with blood pressure. We know at the beginning of this that exercise is important for blood pressure reduction and for maintaining a healthy blood pressure. So then the study is going to be based off that information. Excuse me. So that is what we would call an interventional study. The intervention is now going to be the exercise program that is created for the study. There are observational studies, which we're just trying to learn. The UCLA, we have a number of observational studies because we're at this point right now where we're trying to understand, why do you age differently than I? Why do, people who are what we call super agers, right? People over the age of 80, 90, 100, and they are still being successful in their lives and cognitively normal. Why? So we're not doing any sort of intervention on them. We just really want to learn and to see what can we be able to then maybe turn into a better intervention. So, these are the two main types of studies that exist across the board for any sort of research institution. So looking at this image here of the different types of research studies that do exist, interview studies, these could be as simple as a telephone call where we call you and we just say, hey, Daphne, let's talk to you about your exercise and your diet and your educational history so we can learn more. Again, simply learning more. They could be in-person interviews, and they could also be cognitive testing, where we're trying to see how your brain works through a series of questions. There are biomarker studies, which could be your blood tests, MRI, a PET scan, lumbar punctures, because we want to take a look inside the body. And so now looking at all of these 4 ways of checking for biomarkers, seeing if maybe we can come up with new biomarkers, which they are doing as well, really breaking down, what puts someone at a greater risk of developing dementia or other diseases as well. And then we have what we call clinical trials. So I think this is what people think of more when they think of research studies, is they think of like the clinical trials, where this is, again, that intervention. So we're having our exercise group and our non-exercise group. There's a research study right now that's happening at UCLA that is looking at antioxidants. So we're going to give group A some was that pomegranate pills or pomegranate juice, and group B is not going to get it. And we're going to see who does better on the cognitive testing or whatever markers we are measuring this for. So looking at these lifestyle interventions, medications, a pill, medication or infused medications, which is one of the areas of research for Alzheimer's disease that they're really looking at right now. And I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And then also potential surgeries, not so much for dementia, but for other types of illnesses and conditions. So we're looking at how clinical trials really can help clinicians and scientists develop new treatments for human disease. So we can, again, look at the world of keeping people healthier longer. I see the note that just came up in the chat. Thank you. Can participating in research affect whether we will get insurance coverage? No, it does not impact that. That information is kept private and is not shared with your insurance company. So while that information is asked for, the information from the clinical trial does not go back to them. So hopefully I answered that question. If not, put another question in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will make sure that I address it. So thank you. So clinical trials really they are a partnership among researchers, clinicians, and patients. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to do any sort of research study because I want to stay away from big pharma. I don't like big pharma, right? We hear that often. But seeing how, it's actually the best way of a trial is where it's true collaboration. So you have your research study, your study site, and then a principal investigator, your four main sponsors of the study. So your sponsor, let's say, is going to be a pharmaceutical company. Let's call it Lilly, for example. I'm not paid by them. I have no affiliation with them. They're just the first one that came to my mind. Okay. So then you have your study site. Let's say that's going to be UCLA. So these are all the people that communicate with the study site. The FDA for everything that the research site will then submit to make sure that things are being done properly and not causing harm. The Office of Human Protection Program, Human Research Protection Program, because there has been lots of wrong that has been done with research and clinical studies. And we need to, like, all of the study sites are now really looked at under a microscope to make sure that that doesn't happen again. We appreciate our patients. We very much value their time and their energy and whatever they give to us. And we need to make sure that what we are doing is ethical and that it is safe. So that is why there's all these different levels and layers of making sure that comes through. And then there's the Institutional Review Board, who, again, they make sure everything is good. Every flyer we put out has to be approved by them. There's nothing that gets passed. And then, so it goes from the sponsor to the study site to your principal investigator, which is often an MD or a PhD, who is the one in charge of the study. And then onto the research team, where, again, multi-levels, many people who participate on a staffing level to make sure that these trials go safely and successfully. So there are 3 phases of clinical trials, which I'm sure you've probably heard of before. So phase 1 is essentially, this is way before people are even involved. This is, or a very small percentage of people are involved in this one. Someone I know who, again, I used to work with, he used to work at trials. He would always call this like the pizza and beer phase of a study. This is where they would test, let's say, a medication on young, healthy people, probably pay them enough for some pizza and beer. And it was just a small group, mainly making sure there's no major side effects, nothing, no possible harm that's going to come through it. It's not going to turn anyone green. Making sure that the dosage is correct and really focused. So phase 1, super small group of people. Phase 2 is now going to be is focused upon the people with the disease, the condition, the ailment, whatever we want to call it, where it's going to be a larger population size, about 500 people, because they're now looking to see, is this treatment effective in patients? So if you have Alzheimer's disease and if you experience agitation, then we need to make sure that the medication that we have created to help with agitation is going to work, right? That's the whole point. We don't want to just keep giving people drugs. So making sure that this medication works, seeing what the side effects might be. And then this is often where we incorporate what we call a placebo pill. So this would be like the dummy medication so we don't know who's on what. So then it's not assumed. We call it a double-blind study, where both the researcher and the participant, neither of them know who is on what. So then it's a little bit more fair in terms of our own assessment of the research studies and the results. And then phase 3, this is where you're getting a medication that is closer to FDA approval. And this is after this phase 3 area, making sure this medication works, making sure it fits. It's often thousands of people who are a part of a phase 3 study. And then, seeing from here, can it go on for submission for FDA approval? This sheet that I have here is actually from the UK. So the last part of the of this page isn't completely accurate just because different countries. But I liked this image a lot. And I really feel that, when you look at it visually, seeing this 3 different layers of the phases of trials and why it's unique. This time could just be 10 to 15 years for one medication, let alone anything that's happening over here on the other side of phase 1. That's when people are just still discovering the drug. So you could see how one researcher could actually spend her entire career on a medication. And oftentimes those medications never make it to FDA approval. So when people say what takes so long, this is what takes so long. Also, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias are slow diseases. So it's, you don't know if the medication's really working because it just takes time, which is the one thing that we're all a little short on. We want a cure, we want something to resolve it now, but not always the case. There's my slide. Here we go. So again, thinking about randomized controls for research trials, we have our world of eligible patients. So we talk to people and we say, are you interested? Let's have a conversation with you. Let's figure out, are you eligible? Yes or no? For some studies, if you have a pacemaker, you're not eligible because you need to have, imaging that does not work with a pacemaker. For some people, you could be on a medication already, and you'd have to go off of that to become eligible, but do you want to? So there's lots of these things, maybe you just have other health conditions, making sure that these are right, because we can't just take anybody, because then the efficacy of the trial isn't going to be, it's not going to be good. So we have eligible patients. We then do what we call an informed consent, where this is our time to talk to the interested parties and to say, this is everything that's going to happen. We're laying all of our cards out here. You're going to know everything. And also says you have the right to drop out at any time. So let's say it is a study that's going to last 365 days. It's going to be 1 full year. At day 363, you have the right to back out. Granted, that was a whole year of information that then will literally be thrown out the window. So we don't encourage that, but we also understand that, people have that right, and we want you to know that you have that right. After the informed consent, people are then randomized into either a treatment group or a control group. Then they're studied for the time and then with the outcome that comes after. And again, from the treatment to outcome, that could be years. UCLA, we had a study that was initially a 3-year study, and then it got extended. And I think it went to a 5-year study, and then they actually had the study itself changed a little bit. And so you could either say for those, you can leave at that 5-year mark or sign on for the other part of the new study. So they do take time. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're really reliant upon people to give the time as well for research. So again, I sort of discussed this, and I'm going to zoom through some of this part a little bit. Again, looking at the patient eligibility, what is it? What we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. And this is, I'll meet people at health fairs or out and about, and they'll say, well, what trial should I do? And I'm going to say, I don't know, because I don't know this information about you. I don't know what the trial is looking for. Things like constantly evolve. We get reports all the time about looking for so many people. It changes. So I just say, let us call you and we can have a discussion. So then we can see what actually works. Because maybe it's just a basic age limitation, but then the study may open up and they're going to drop it down, so it used to be 65, now it's 60. So that's why we say just having these discussions is really what is the most important. Again, I mentioned this as well, looking at the safety of our clinical trials, explaining risks, explaining potential procedures and requirements. The IRB, and seeing their role is to truly make sure that the study is ethical, and that the rights of the participants are protected. That's it. We need to make sure that things are done right. The point of randomization, one of the reasons, or really one of the biggest reason, is that we find that we don't want to be biased. We, you know, let's say if you knew someone was on a medication and then they came in, you're like, I think they're doing better. You will then most likely score their tests as them doing better. So, if there's a little gray area, you would probably give them the better score just based upon your own bias. We all do this, right? So if you aren't aware of that and everyone comes in looking exactly the same in terms of, the information that you get medical records wise, you're not going to assume that they're doing better just because you know which group they're in or which group they are not in. With everything comes risks and discomforts. If you do a clinical trial at UCLA, you got traffic to deal with, parking, right? Risks and discomforts. Some could be much more serious though. In all honesty, there's always risks. There could be life-threatening side effects. Very, very rare, but it's so important that we share this information and we let people know. There's also the rule that there's no guarantee that the new treatment is going to be more effective. You could get the placebo. So these again, risks, but we all need to take some risks to really be able to make change. A researcher, neurologist that I know, she said, she's like, the first person who's going to be cured of Alzheimer's disease is going to be a person in a clinical trial. Right? You think about that. Like it's true, obviously. But what a great way to think about it and think about the importance of participation is because there will be a first. And so who's going to be that first? And really making sure that if this matters to you, putting your hat in the ring to make sure that there's a reason that we could do something about this disease. So again, looking at some of the benefits of participation, an important note that I like to just mention is that clinical trials should be free. So if you contact a place and they're asking you only need to pay $250 to sign up to have access to this research, run away. Because that is not right. You might even be the one that receives compensation. In terms of money, in terms of reimbursement for gas, in terms of food. But no, all research trials and studies should be free. So if anyone comes at you asking for money on your end, run and go somewhere else. So some of the questions that we get frequently, especially regarding Alzheimer's disease trials, people will ask if you can stay on their current medications. And for the most part, yes. Obviously depends. We say for the most part, yes, but with the little star, the little asterisk. For most studies, the answer is yes for that. Can you be a part of the study on your own, or does someone need to participate with you? For most, at least memory-related studies, we do require a study partner. When it comes to memory-related studies, it makes sense, right? If you are having cognitive complaints, you may not be a reliable source. And so we want somebody who's just going to validate what you say. Say like, no, right, no, Mary was right. We saw the grandchildren this weekend. This is what we did. Or say, no, that's not what happened. Again, this isn't just a study regarding, wart removal. We want to be able to, we really need that the care partner to be able to help give the backup information and to really be able to help with the validity of the study. Will you ever know if you were in the placebo or the study group? Usually no. When a study is complete, neither the investigator, so the doctor in charge, or the patient finds out which group they are in. But let's say if you are on a trial and the medication ultimately does get FDA approved, there is what we will call an open label extension. So then this allows all participants to then be on the study drug after what we call the double blind period. So this does allow for people to get the medication even if they were on the placebo. So in my remaining bit of time here, just want to talk about some of the research studies that we currently have at UCLA, at the Eaton Center. And I show this to you for, yes, of course, if you want to participate in our studies and in our trials, great to have a QR code at the end. Otherwise, I also just look at it. So I share this so you know all the different types of studies that exist. It's not always medication. So the first one that we have, again, going off of what we talked about at the beginning, the different types of studies, are two of our interview studies. So these, the first one is called the Dementia Research Focus Group. This focus, it's a focus group conversation. So these are in small groups, maybe about, 4 to 6, maybe 8 people at a time, where we're asking questions regarding research involvement, asking people, okay, why haven't you participated? Like, that's a really great question that we need to know. Is it no one's ever asked you, or is it you just assumed there would never be one that would be right for you, or you didn't care? Why? Again, we as researchers need to know, okay, well then how are we changing our plan, our trajectory here so that we can get people to participate in trials? This research focus group discusses dementia, memory loss, and caregiving as well. Because are you a caregiver of someone with dementia, but you've never had them participate in a trial, or you? One of the other parts of my job is I run a lot of caregiver support groups. And so pre-COVID, lots of our group members participated in a research group all about caregiver sleep. And it was funny. So everyone would have it was like a tracker watch. And so we'd be there in group, and there'd be people, everyone like, oh, you joined the study too. And like would see sort of like the identification of the study, because they were tracking people's sleep, they were tracking people's exercise, their sunlight exposure, to see who maybe fared better. And so again, just some of these conversations that people were having. Another research study that we have currently, it's called Dementia Research Education and Advancement. It is actually acronym of DREAM, D-R-E-A, forgetting what the M is. And so the DREAM LA study, looking at, again, health conditions that affect memory as people age. So do you have heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity? What other types of health conditions could impact your cognition as you age? For this study, there's different levels of involvement. So if you wanted to participate, but you weren't too sure about how much you really wanted to be involved, there's a questionnaire, and then we ask for saliva samples, and then an opportunity for memory testing. And then that's it. And it's not the major memory testing. It's just a quick little 20-minute questionnaire. And then looking at social risk factors as well. It is a paid study based upon the levels of involvement. So again, more of these just very general, as we call more like light touch research studies. These next 3 studies that I have here on the screen are what we call a longitudinal study. So these are studies that go over a long period of time, where we're, once you enroll, there might be a time frame at the end. Let's say maybe it could be a 10-year study, or we just ask to continue to study you, for the rest of your life, or for whatever that time frame is, but over a longer period of time. The first one is the ADNI study, which really, it's been going on since 2024. So we're at 21 years of this research study. We're trying to understand the changes in aging as well as Alzheimer's disease. trying to figure out why do some people get Alzheimer's and some don't? So this study really has been critical in terms of giving researchers the information for development of early detection techniques. At the beginning of this presentation, I talked about how diagnosis has really changed. And lots of that is because of this research study. They've been able to understand the changes that exist and be able to see how can we adapt our tools and our technology to be able to identify those biomarkers and those changes. Another study called the Biomarkers in Neurodegenerative Disease Study, or BIND. It actually someone can be enrolled in ADNI as well as BIND at the same time. It just gives sort of like you're on one, and then the BIND study is a little extra information that we are looking at, a little bit more testing. I think there's a sleep test that's part of it. Again, looking overall cognition and trying to see how does the brain function? How do people change as they age? We have a study, which is the Alzheimer's disease family-based study. So this is where we're looking at genes associated with Alzheimer's and related disorders in extended families. So it's not just if you have a mom who has Alzheimer's disease, it would be if you have a mom and an aunt and a cousin. Like, okay, there is most likely some sort of family genetics here. So how can we learn from these families? So understanding the importance of this. So, and all of these studies are not UCLA specific. These are studies that are, I think they're all just in the United States. There are some studies that are global. And so we just happen to be one site out of all of the other sites that are a part of the research studies. So this is a cool study that we have studying music in the brain. And specifically understanding how 40 hertz enhanced music and light. So you actually go in, it is I think it's I'm not exactly sure on the length of time, but you could do this study as well as, let's say, the BIND study, where actually they did it overnight as well, where they are measuring the brain activity based on, you create your own playlist, but they just edit that playlist to be enhanced with this 40 hertz music and light. So it's really interesting. I don't work on this study, so it's one that I find interesting, but I can't really talk the super specifics about it. But we all know that music plays a significant role in our brain. There's I'm sure we've all had the times where there's a song that you haven't heard in 15, 20 years, and that song plays, and you're like, oh, I know every word. How do you know every word of that? You don't remember what you had for lunch yesterday, right? So it's this amazing world that impact the brain that music has on our brains. And so this study itself is specifically looking for people with normal cognition or mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, or specifically dementia with Lewy body. So again, looking at how can maybe this be a therapy for people with Alzheimer's or dementia with Lewy body or mild cognitive impairment to actually help sort of restore parts of their brain. So this study is called SUVIN. This one is actually looking for people who have Alzheimer's disease and who have agitation due to Alzheimer's disease. So it's looking to see if a medication that is already, approved, to see if it has a positive effect on treating agitation for Alzheimer's disease. Time limited, 20 weeks, only 7 visits, where trying to see how can we help with behaviors? Because if any of you are caring for a person with Alzheimer's disease, sometimes it's the behaviors that are the hardest part. You don't know, like someone is so agitated and they're so frustrated and you just want to help them. But there's really, like, we don't know what to do. And sometimes medication does need to be involved. Behavioral intervention doesn't work anymore. So how can we come up with new medications that can really help? So this is a research study that is happening with that right now. At the Eaton Center, our clinical trials program is called the Kagan Clinical Trials Program. In gratitude to the Kagan family who has given us money to be able to really help with this program and to be able to help support lots of our research studies. So other areas of focus that are taking place, low intensity focused ultrasound, where people actually wear like those ultrasound hats, and they actually do focused ultrasound on different parts of the brain. I alluded to this earlier, the research study regarding polyphenols and cognitive decline. There's a lot going into the world of nutrition and interventions, antioxidants. We know they're so good for the body and good for the brain. So then how can we really incorporate that safely into our diets and into our lives? Looking at actually, there's a personalized brain stimulation for people who've had a traumatic brain injury. So, looking at these different areas, which I always find it's also fascinating. My thoughts always like, the people who come up with this are amazing. They come up with an idea and a hypothesis and they want to make it different and they want to make it better. So how can we make these things better? And sometimes you have to think outside of the box. Um, the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, we have the amyloid or the plaques, which those are what are picked up in PET scans at this time. But now we're looking at PET scans that can also pick up and identify the tau or the tangles of Alzheimer's disease. So we're studying the effectiveness and the safety of what we call a tau PET scan. And then there's always more to be added. I know we have 2 more that are coming online later this year. And so, we also collaborate a lot outside of the Eaton Center at UCLA. So we're part of the Department of Neurology. And we partner with geriatrics, with health sciences, with psychiatry to be able to really be able to have more of a robust research institution and not just our one department. So seeing how can we collaborate with other departments is what really gives the strength to a place like UCLA or other academic institutions. So if you are interested in research at, regarding Alzheimer's disease, again, the Eaton Center, we are a great local trials resource for everything, for all clinical trials, clinicaltrials.gov. That is your best website. It's a terrible website. It's hard to navigate, but it's your best website that shows what has been FDA approved, or not FDA approved, but what trials are approved to be taking place. The National Institute on Aging as well, the resource I said at the very beginning. And if you are closer to USC, they also have a good Alzheimer's Research Center. As I say, we work very collaboratively in this world, maybe not so much on the football field, but here when it comes to Alzheimer's research, we are definitely collaborators. And we also know Los Angeles, and we know that if you live near USC, you do not want to drive to UCLA and vice versa. So, definitely always like to give them a shout out for their research. And our centers have different things as well. So, UCLA may not have something that would be specific for you. So then you look elsewhere, and that's fine. We just want people to participate and for people to really find, to be able to help out with the research. If you are interested in research at UCLA, this is our fancy QR code. So you could get your phone out and scan this. This takes you to that intake form at the very beginning, where essentially we're just asking for, you're giving us permission to call you. That's it. You can hang up on us after that. You can say, don't call me again. But it just gives us permission to call you and then to see what we may have available that would work for you at this time. So I think, okay, that is the end of my slideshow. I do see that there is a question in the chat. Are there concerns about research funding being cut given the amount of news? Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, completely. The neurology department was significantly impacted by the recent federal cuts. So we are scrambling to be very clear and very honest. Some people's research has actually been halted because of these federal cuts. People have been encouraged to reapply. And so we are doing what we can from our side. UCLA obviously has a bunch of really smart lawyers on this as well to try to make this shift. For clinical trials, though, those are not currently impacted, but that would be what we have going on now because those are coming from private sponsors. So the clinical trials themselves are not impacted, but more the greater world of research is. Best way to support right now is obviously advocacy. Lobbying is very important. Also, we are really relying heavily upon upon philanthropy and upon donors. It is something that we are definitely relying upon at this time and are very grateful. As I say, if anyone has $5 to 50 million, we'll take it all. And so also just, connections with foundations and people who might be able to really want to invest in research. So that is something that we are asking people a lot right now. They're on our website, which is in front of you, the eastonad.ucla.edu. They have there is a part at the top of the page that talks about giving. So if that is something that you would be willing to do, we'd be most appreciative of that at this time.
Thank you, Monica, for sharing everything today regarding clinical trials, specifically when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia research. I think there were some really great questions that were asked, especially about the insurance, because I don't think many people think about that. And maybe that is a halting factor for some people. One moment.
Yeah. And just regarding the insurance as well, one of the things too is that, oh shoot, where was I going with this? Oh my gosh. Even though I didn't hear it, Daphne's chirping clock disrupted me. So shoot. Oh shoot, I was going somewhere. All right, you keep going and then maybe I'll
But just that, that may be a hindrance for some people to apply for being a participant in a clinical trial because of worries about insurance or any findings that happened during the trial, getting back to insurance companies, with, what is it? Predispositions and things like that they may have. So
and that's one thing that I remembered my thought is that they lots of the research studies as well completely build that in. They understand that someone may be hesitant because they're worried about being denied insurance. This is all real. This is part of the people who work in this world on more like the legal side of everything. This is a big area that they want to protect pre-existing conditions. That's they want to really protect the participants from this. So this is something that, again, when you're looking at the IRB form, all of that, this is an area that we understand because, you don't want a diagnosis and then not be able to get insurance. So that is an area that's very much a focus.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to close out and saying thank you again, Monica, for taking the time today, answering all the questions that we had. And I do have flyers regarding the caregiver sleep study and a handful of things through UCLA. So I will go ahead and include that in our recap email from today. And if you joined in a little bit later, this has been recorded and we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel so that you may catch whatever sections you potentially missed. And everything that Monica has discussed today, if there are flyers, links, things like that, they will be going in the email that I will send out here by the end of the day, if not early tomorrow. So if there are no further questions, just want to say that we do have our senior prom coming up on September 18th. from 7 to 9 p.m. at Blush Banquet Hall in North Hollywood. Would love to see you guys there. I know that there's a couple people in the chat that are going to be attending, so excited to see you guys. And if you are unable to attend, you can always donate a ticket through our Send a Senior program, or you can also volunteer as well. With that being said, I will let everybody go. Thank you again, Monica, for taking the time today. Really appreciate you and your support of Lisa's Care Connection.
Absolutely. Thank you much. Thank you very much. Have fun at the prom. And please, everyone, feel free to reach out as well. I was trying to put my email in the chat, but I realized I don't think I can do that.
I can
So
always share the email as well,
yeah,
if that's okay.
perfectly fine. Like if anyone has any additional questions about this, or you just feel free to email me. So you can connect with Daphne and get my email address. So I'm happy to be able to be a support or reference for anyone as well. So
All right. Thank you all. Thank
great.
you, Monica,
See you, everyone.
and have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye.